Well, here's what I want. I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have ever gotten lost before? Okay. Here's what I want you. I want you to turn to a neighbor and tell them your story of how you got lost. You got like 30 seconds. Go. All right. Who has the craziest story? Who got lost somewhere like nobody would believe? You said the church. What did you say? The third biggest museum in the United States.
Yeah.
I've never been there, but that sounds like a big place. Where is that? Tennessee or something. Okay.
I remember getting lost. I don't know if it was exactly the third biggest, but I remember it being.
Nice. Who else? Anybody else? I'll tell you one of mine. I remember being really little, probably like preschool age, and my mom, I'm pretty sure we were in like Home Depot or something, and we were wandering around. I had this little like Barney stuffed animal. Anybody watch Barney? To this day, dinosaurs are the best. My favorite. Anyway, so just maybe not purple and green. But I was playing around with my Barney, and I was throwing him up and down, and I was like, dancing with him in the aisles or whatever kids do. And I looked up, and my mom wasn't there, and I thought, uh-oh. And I went and like looked down all the aisles and was yelling, "Mom! Mom! Mom!" Couldn't find her. I don't know why I vividly remember this. So I walked up to the front counter calmly, and I was like, "Can you, on the intercom for Sonia Wilkins, that's my mom. I'm lost." You just imagine me with my Barney there. I don't, they're just like, okay. And, I kind of expected it to be like, even at that age, like I had seen movies and I'd seen shows, and I'd imagine, my mom was going to run up and go, "Zach, I found you. I didn't know where you went." And instead, she was pushing the cart, and she was rolling her eyes and shaking her head. She's like, "I told you to stay with me." And I thought, oh, well, darn. But we all know what it's like to be lost. Maybe you were exploring with some friends, and you were like in the woods somewhere, and you got lost. I've also been there before. Maybe you were in a department store and lost your parents, or maybe you've been on a road trip before, and the person who was driving had no idea where they were going, and you were just in the middle of nowhere, and maybe you had no cell service, so you didn't have a GPS. And so I remember the days when I did not have a GPS on my phone and getting lost driving, and it's kind of scary. You got to actually get in that glove box and pull out the map that's all folded up and never been used before and try to figure out where you're going. But or where you've been at, yeah. And the question that tends to come up whenever we're in a situation like that is when you're lost, you ask yourself, what am I supposed to do now, right? What am I supposed to do now? I'm lost. I don't know where to go. I don't know where I've been. What am I supposed to do now? And we've been in this series all about injustice, and this is the final week of that series, so we're going to wrap it up today. But in this question, or in the series on injustice, we've kind of been asking that question, what am I supposed to do? Because as you remember, we've talked about, first you have to see injustice, then you have to ask God to show you what to do. We've explored the questions like, what are we supposed to do? And then does that mean that God is not loving or not all-powerful? Because if he was all-loving and all-powerful, then wouldn't he have a plan? And we remember we talked last week how God does actually have a plan for injustice in the world, and that plan includes us. And so, if you remember, that's kind of where we leave it. So, if we are a part of that plan, then what are we supposed to do when it comes to injustice? It's a legitimate question, and maybe sometimes we feel like there's not a whole lot we can do about injustice, because injustices are everywhere. Maybe we don't feel like there's a whole lot we can do because how many of you felt like I'm too young to do anything in life, right? You felt like you were maybe you had some obstacles in your path because you were too young to do anything of real significance. Or maybe you feel like you don't know how to do something. Anybody ever, you've had the desire to do something, but you don't know how? How many of you ever looked up how to do something on YouTube? Right? If you don't know how to do something, you look it up. But there's not really a whole lot of content out there if you were to look up what to do about injustice. You'll get a whole wide range of things that may or may not be helpful. But when it comes to actually what God says we're supposed to do about injustice, it's tough. Some of us, we know that we're supposed to stand up for injustice. We know we're supposed to, be good Christians and do kingdom work and serve and all this kind of stuff and stand up for injustice, but what does that actually look like? How are we supposed to stand up for injustice? Standing up and doing something about injustice isn't easy. Standing up and doing something about injustice is not easy. And so when it comes to figuring out what God's plan for our lives looks like when it comes to that, I want you just to recognize that when you feel like maybe you aren't enough or you feel like there's not really anything that you can do, I want you to remember that you are somebody. You are somebody who can make a difference in the world. And sometimes it takes a little belief in yourself, but sometimes it means you got to have a little faith in God's plan that he is actually using you and preparing you for something, and maybe even using you now, even if you're not really quite sure how he's doing that. So today, I want to read in the book of James. How many of you know who James is? Who's James? Yes, you. There is a James that's one of his disciples, but not this James. Yes. That's not the James we're talking about. Anybody know what James we're talking about? Who wrote the book of James in the Bible? Jesus' brother. Yes. There you go. Shout out to Jared. Jesus' brother. So, here's the thing. Let me ask you guys a question. You have a brother, right? Or siblings?
I have an annoying sister. I have 2 annoying siblings.
Siblings, okay. How would you feel if one of your siblings came up to you and was like, hey, yo, I'm God? Do you think you would believe them? So, I mean, Jesus probably didn't pick on his siblings the way that you pick on yours, but it would still be a tough pill to swallow that Jesus is God. So James, the fact that he actually believes that Jesus is God is a huge deal, and we should listen to what he has to say because he probably knows Jesus better than most people. And here's what he says when it comes to injustices in the world and what we're supposed to do. This is what he says in chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. He says, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In other words, he's saying, if you see something, if you see a need that needs done, and you give lip service to it, but you don't actually do anything to make a difference about the situation, then what good is it? You ever heard the phrase, actions speak louder than words? So just talking about it, just giving lip service to something doesn't actually change the issue. We actually have to do something about it. And so James continues in the very next verse, and he says, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. So if we want our faith to make a difference in the world, then it has to be accompanied by action. Jesus says it this way. He says, you will know that they are my disciples if by the way that they love one another. In other words, if they are my disciples, they will bear, he used another analogy, they will bear good fruit. You guys remember when Jesus was talking about this? He says, if you are my disciples and you come from my tree, then you will bear good fruit. And so this is James saying it basically another way. He's saying faith without work is dead. Now, we have to kind of balance that because, it's not like we can't save ourselves. Sometimes we confuse this and we think, well, if I just do enough things, then God will be happy with me. If I just do enough, then I will be enough. And that's also not true because we can't earn our salvation. There's no amount of good things that we can do to counteract the bad things and the sin that is in our lives. And so we need Jesus. But at the same time, if we have Jesus, then we should be different. So faith without action is dead. And when it comes to injustice, I want you to recognize Jesus was always doing something. When it comes to injustice, Jesus was always doing something. When you look at his life, he was always taking care of people. He was always looking out for people. Even if he wasn't performing miracles, he was teaching and he was spending time with people in relationship with people. He hardly got any alone time. And at the end of a day, when you're really tired and you want to do nothing except sit on the couch and watch TV or get on your phone or just maybe close your eyes and go to sleep at the end of a long day and your body is tired, maybe after practice or something, Jesus was like that all the time. And instead of going right to bed, he was like, I didn't get alone time with God, so I'm going to go up on a mountain and pray. And he leaves to go have like his alone time with God. And so when it comes to injustice, you have to recognize that Jesus actually really cared about people, and he cared enough about people that he spent time with God so that he could know what God was like. He could know God's intentions. He could be in communication with God, and he could see where God's heart was when he was around other people. So when it comes to injustice, Jesus was always doing something, but he created you and me to be the somebodies, to do the some things about injustice. And when you and I are in tune with God and in sync with what he is trying to accomplish in this world, then our eyes become more open to the injustices that are out there, like we talked about in week 1, but also what maybe God's plan is for us when it comes to that. And I want to read another passage that Paul wrote in Galatians 6, 9 through 10. He says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people." Now, let me tell you why this is really hard. This is why Paul says not to give up, not to grow weary of doing good. Here's why this is a big deal. You guys ever planted seeds or try to grow a plant before? Like when you have seeds, they start out as this little tiny thing, right? And when you plant it, it goes where? It goes big. When you plant it, it goes where? Into the ground. It goes into the ground. Nice try. So when you put a plant in the ground, it starts to grow, but for a while you may not see any evidence of the growth. Do you guys remember the first few days or maybe the first few weeks after you plant something and you don't see anything? Does it feel defeating? You can't just plant the seed, water it once and walk away and then hope that it grows, right? You have to come back and you have to keep watering it. You have to keep nurturing it. You have to make sure it gets proper sunlight. You have to give it love. You have to take care of it. You have to nurture it for it to grow. So if we're supposed to be nurturing it, and here's why it's tough, and here's why Paul says not to grow weary. Because when you plant something, for all that time that you don't see anything happening above the surface, you know what's actually happening beneath the surface? The plant, the seed is growing. It's growing roots. It's getting its foundation set before you even see anything out the root or out above the soil. So when it comes to our faith and when it comes to fighting injustice, when it comes to actually not growing weary of doing the work that God has in store for us, it can be easy to give up because maybe we don't see the plant sprouting yet. But actually underneath the surface, God is actually doing a lot. And if you are changing, then you are making a difference. And what's tough is we don't always get to see the plant grow in full blossom. We don't always get to see what it looks like at the end. And in fact, Moses, if you go back to the book of Exodus, Moses, he never got to see the promised land. Actually, I think it's in Deuteronomy. He never got to see the promised land. In fact, he died before he got to go in. And the whole point of him delivering the people from Egypt was to deliver them to the promised land. Moses never got to go in. So he planted all that seed of the people getting to live in the promised land, but he never got to see it fully sprouted, fully grown. He never got to see that promise fulfilled. And when it comes to us doing what God has for our lives, and God carrying out God's plan, we don't always get to see the end result, but he is still working and moving. So when it comes to injustice, never stop doing something. Never grow weary and never give up. So a few things that you can do in order to ensure that you are actually living according to God's plan when it comes to being somebody who does something about injustice is one, you have to use your voice. You have to speak up when you see things that are unjust. You have to speak up when you see things that are not right. You cannot just stand by and watch things happen. You have to actually vocalize when things that are wrong are happening. And sometimes it can be easy because we don't want to draw attention to ourselves to just I'm just going to mind my own business. But sometimes we have to speak up and use our voice. Two, we have to use our influence. Whether you don't have social media and don't have any kind of following, or you get to be the point where you are an influencer and have thousands of followers, whatever it is, you have a sphere of influence, whether it's your family or your siblings or your close friends or whatever it is. You have the opportunity right now to even volunteer in the kids area in our church and have influence on littler kids that are just a few life seasons behind you. So you have the ability to use your influence. So use your influence in order to draw attention to God. Number 3, use your talent. All of us are gifted with different things, but God gives each and every one of us special gifts and talents that we can use in order to bring him glory. So whenever an opportunity presents itself, maybe God is preparing a talent in your life so that you can use that in order to bring glory to him, in order to fight injustice. And so sometimes it just takes knowing and being aware that God can use your talents and your gifts, and you have to ask him for eyes to see where he wants you to do that. If you don't know maybe where that fits in your life, then you'll have an opportunity to talk about that a little bit more in small groups. But the last thing is to use your time. This one is really tough because sometimes we're selfish about our time. We want to spend our time on our things and not spend our time, volunteering, or spend our time helping other people, or spend our time, investing and doing practice. When I took piano lessons, I did not want to spend the time to practice. I just wanted to be good magically. But it doesn't work like that. And sometimes you have to practice and you have to put in the time to get better at things. You have to spend time getting to know God, spend time in his word, getting to know his word better so that you know what his heart is like. And sometimes it takes putting in the time before God can use your gifts and your talents to do the things that he has for you. So use your voice, your influence, your talent, and your time. When it comes to injustice, never stop doing something. So as you guys go to your small groups, I want you to think about this question. How can you use your voice, your influence, your talent, or your time to do something about injustice? I want you to think about that and talk about that within your small groups. I'll go ahead and pray, and then we'll be dismissed.